This is Truthful Manipulation, where truth is the truth and reality is made real and clear to understand. I'm Dave Kelsey, and I'm here today with my co-host, H. Daniel Mujahid. Welcome to Truthful Manipulation. I'm Dave.
And I'm Daniel.
And today we're here talking about something that's not theoretical, not abstract, not someday. It's not one of those conversations where you sit back, break it down, point at the world, and then go home unchanged. This one's about a moment, a real moment, a choice. A moment when people have to decide whether they still believe in this country belongs to the people or whether they're willing to slowly hand it over to fear, ego, intimidation, and the worship of power.
Let's call this episode, Why is More Important Than Ever to be part of the No Kings protests this weekend coming up, ladies and gentlemen. And before we go another inch, let's be clear about something. This episode is not about violence. It's not going to be about hating on anyone. It's not about chaos. It's going to be more about conscientiousness, being conscious. It's going to be about lawful and peaceful civic presence. It's going to be about the moral responsibility of people who say they care about freedom. They care about truth and dignity and democratic accountability.
Because there becomes a point, and maybe we're there now, where staying home is no longer neutral. Staying home becomes a statement. Silence becomes a statement. Absence becomes a statement. And history has a nasty habit of recording what people did, but it also records what decent people failed to do.
Yeah, Dave, yeah. That's the heart of this episode right there. What does it mean to show up? Or why does it even matter? And why now? Why where we are now? And what kind of country do we want to become? When ordinary people decide that the cost of courage is too high, things start to stay with us and be with us. So stay with us here, because this is bigger than one march. This is bigger than a rally. This is bigger than a weekend, ladies and gentlemen. This is about the kind of public we're going to be, you and me.
This moment's not normal. So let's start here. A lot of people knew something is wrong. They can feel it. They can feel it in the language. They feel it in the meanness. They feel it in the constant pressure to submit to a version of reality that keeps changing depending on who has the microphone. They feel it when truth stops being treated like truth and starts getting treated like a marketing option. They feel it when power starts talking like it should not be questioned. They feel it when cruelty gets reframed as strength. And they feel it when intimidation gets rebranded as leadership.
And here's the dangerous part, ladies and gentlemen. When people live inside that kind of atmosphere long enough, we actually begin to adjust to it. We begin to normalize it. We explain it away. Then all of a sudden, we get tired. And once exhaustion sets in, ladies and gentlemen, the manipulations, they have an opening. Because tired people, they are easier to govern through fear. Tired people are easier to divide. Tired people are easier to demoralize. Think about it. Tired people stop showing up. That's how unhealthy rulers, unhealthy power survives. Not only because of the people who push these narratives, but because of the people who, quietly surrender to it.
That line matters. Say it again in your own head. Unhealthy power survives, not just because of the people who push it, because of the people who quietly surrender to it. And surrender doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes surrender looks polite. Sometimes surrender looks busy. Sometimes surrender looks like, well, I don't really do protests. Well, I've got things going on. Well, I don't know if it'll matter. Somebody else will go. That's the soft language of public retreat. That's how citizens talk themselves out of citizenship.
And our show may never become popular because one thing we are committed to here at Truthful Manipulation is being honest with you always. A lot of people are not indifferent. They may be disturbed, they may be worried, they may be frustrated, they may even be morally uneasy. But these things, being uneasy alone, it does not protect our democracy, ladies and gentlemen. Concern by itself does not hold the line. Private outrage does not create public accountability. You, we, we do not defend a public square by disappearing from it.
And that right there is the issue, Daniel. Everybody wants the benefits of democracy. Nobody wants the burden of democracy. People want the rights, the stability, the protections, the voice. But democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires participation. It requires moral stamina. It requires showing up when it'd be easier not to. And that's why this weekend matters, because sometimes a weekend becomes a witness. Sometimes a crowd becomes a line in the sand. And sometimes public presence says what private worry never could.
Mm.
And this is what no kings really means.
Let's talk about that phrase right there, Dave, a little bit. No kings. That's not just a slogan, ladies and gentlemen. That's a civic principle, America. It means no one is above accountability. It means no one is beyond scrutiny. It means no one gets to place themselves above the law, above the people, above the Constitution, above the truth, and above consequences. No kings means we do not hand our citizenship over to somebody's ego. No kings means this is not a country built to satisfy a ruler's appetite, lust, or need for obedience. No kings mean leadership is supposed to be temporary, not permanent, ongoing in its accountability, and answerable to we, the people. No kings means there are limits, there are guardrails, there are standards, there is a line.
And that's the fight, isn't it? The fight's not always over whether somebody wears a crown. The fight's over whether they act like they deserve one, whether they demand loyalty over truth, whether they treat disagreement like betrayal, whether they turn public institutions into mirrors for themselves, whether they make everything about personal power, personal grievance, personal vengeance, personal image. That's king behavior. That doesn't require a throne. It only requires a culture willing to kneel.
My. And when we say kneel, we don't just mean kneel literally, we mean mentally. kneeling morally, kneeling institutionally. A culture kneels when it stops asking questions. A culture kneels when it excuses what it would condemn by anyone else. A community, a neighborhood, a family, a society kneels when fear becomes stronger than principle. A culture kneels when people decide peace at any price is better than truth with conflict. That's a dangerous trade, ladies and gentlemen, because once the public gets trained to accept domination, everything else starts sliding with it. Language slides, standards slides, our values slide, our institutions slide, basic human decency itself slides, the meaning of responsibility slides. And then one day everybody looks around and says, hey, how did we get here?
We got here a little bit at a time. We got here through normalization, through excuses, through fatigue, through silence. And you got there because decent people kept waiting for a more convenient time to stand up. That's why no kings matters, because it's a public rejection of that drift. It says, no, this line still exists. No, public office is not personal worship. No, the people still matter. No, the law still matters. No, truth still matters. No, intimidation is not leadership. When citizens say no kings, what they're really saying is, we will not be trained to bow.
And that sentence, it belongs in every mind listening right now, and you should make sure others are aware of that. We will not be trained to bow. We will not bow down to propaganda. We will not give in or bow down to somebody's ego. We will not give in and bow down to being fearful. Isn't that what America is about? Isn't that what we really are made of? We won't be bowing down to public bullies. We won't be bowing down to theatrical dominance. We dressed up like as though it's strength. A healthy democracy requires a spine, ladies and gentlemen. And public participation is one way that spine becomes visible.
So we have to ask a question here, and that's, why do good people stay home? Now let's get uncomfortable for a minute, because a lot of people listening probably agree with the basic message already. But agreement's not action. And if this weekend matters, then we got to talk honestly about why good people, decent people, thoughtful people still do not show up. I'll give you a few reasons. Some people stay home because they think public action is messy. Some stay home because they think it won't make a difference. Some stay home because they don't want conflict. Some stay home because they've been trained to believe that dignity means detachment. Some stay home because they're afraid to be judged, afraid of being seen, afraid of being photographed, afraid of being called partisan, afraid of being misunderstood. And some stay home because deep down, they're waiting for somebody more qualified to do the standing.
You're telling it like it is, Dave. Now, that last one, it's bigger than people, really realize, There is this quiet lie, people tell themselves. We may tell ourselves, America. We say, well, I'm not the one. I'm not the one to lead, or I'm not the one to speak up, or I'm not the one that needs to show up, or I'm not the one that needs to take a stand. And that sounds humble, but sometimes this is really not humility. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we're just avoiding dressed up modesty because, history itself is full of moments where ordinary people like you and I, ladies and gentlemen, are in fact those that we call the ones. Not because they were perfect, not because they had all the answers, and not because they were fearless, even, but because they decided that conscience was more important than comfort.
And that's the key, Daniel. Not courage without fear, courage with fear. Not clarity with tension, clarity without tension, clarity in tension. Not action because everything is guaranteed, action because some things matter whether the outcome is guaranteed or not. That's adulthood. That's citizenship. That's moral seriousness.
Yeah, let's address another reason people may stay home here, Dave. Because we get a lot of feedback and observations, and a lot of people are just burned out. They're, let's face it, they're emotionally exhausted. They're financially stressed out in this climate, this environment, where this society, this time in America, they're carrying family pressures, they're carrying, personal disappointments. They're carrying a sense that the country itself keeps demanding more and more while giving us less and less. So when a protest comes up, the mind says, I just can't take one more thing. And that's understandable. It really is. But there is another truth sitting besides us. Sometimes the thing that feels like one more burden is actually one of the few acts, ladies and gentlemen, that helps a person stop feeling helpless. Showing up with others can remind you, and it can remind me, that we are not crazy, that we are not alone, that our values still matter, that our values and our neighbors matter, that what we worry about is not something we worry about alone, that we have witnesses, that our conscience has company, that matter. Isolation feeds despair. Presence interrupts it.
That's so true. Manipulation loves isolation because isolated people are easier to gaslight, easier to frighten, easier to convince that everyone else has already surrendered. But when you stand shoulder to shoulder with people who still believe in limits, dignity, and accountability, something changes. Your posture changes. Your breathing changes. Your sense of proportion changes. And your belief that resistance is possible changes. And maybe most importantly, your silence breaks.
So, yes, true, good people may have to stay home for real reasons, even for good reasons. But good reasons can still have bad consequences. And when enough good people stay home at the same time, the public square gets handed over to the loudest, angriest, most corrupt, most power hungry people in the environment, in the square, in the room, in the house, in the capital, in the country. That's not a small loss, ladies and gentlemen. That's how civic culture gets deformed.
This episode is brought to you by Truthful Manipulation, a roadmap to live by. If you've ever asked yourself how good people get misled, how false narratives spread, how influence turns into control, and how to stand your ground without becoming manipulative yourself, this book was written for you. Truthful Manipulation, a roadmap to live by, is about learning how to recognize the tactics, protect your judgment, strengthen your ethics, and lead with integrity in a world that keeps rewarding noise over truth. It's not just a book to read, it's a book to use. Get your copy, follow the podcast, and join us as we keep breaking down the forces shaping minds, choices, and culture. Because when you understand manipulation, you stop being owned by it. And now back to the show.
This is an important section, ladies and gentlemen, that we want to speak to you about now. The second people hear the word protest, some minds go immediately to disorder, noise, anger, property damage, lawlessness, threats. But a peaceful protest is not any of that. A peaceful protest is disciplined public speech. It is the body showing up where the conscience already exists and is. It's a moral visibility. It's now a lawful visibility. It's a collective visibility.
Yes, a disciplined protest says, here we are. We're paying attention. We reject this direction. We will not disappear. We will not be quietly managed into surrender. This is not chaos. This is citizenship with a backbone. And let's make another distinction. To protest is not valuable because it's loud. It's valuable because it's clear. Not because it's angry, but because it's disciplined. Not because it humiliates others, but because it bears witness. That matters. Clarity matters. Moral seriousness matters. Self-control matters.
And you know what discipline protest also does, ladies and gentlemen? It protects the message from being stolen, hijacked, bamboozled. It protects the message from being stolen, ladies and gentlemen. Because whenever people gather for a public cause, there will always be forces that, really want to distort it. So some want to, caricature it. Some want to, bait it, Some want to provoke it, Some want to reduce it to one ugly image so that they never have to deal with the actual substance. That's why it matters how people show up. Calmness matters. Preparation matters. Respect matters. De-escalation matters. Knowing why you are there matters. The strongest presence in the streets is not the person who loses control. It's the person who keeps control while refusing to surrender principles. I would say to you, ladies and gentlemen, the power of peaceful protests is not disorder. It is disciplined refusal.
Disciplined refusal. That's worth holding on to. Refusal to worship power. Refusal to accept intimidation as normal. Refusal to let truth become optional. Refusal to let public life become a theater of submission. And when enough people embody that refusal peacefully, it sends a message no speech alone can send. It tells leaders they're being watched. It tells institutions they're being measured. It tells neighbors they're not alone. And it tells vulnerable people that somebody still cares enough to physically show up. That is public good.
And to anyone listening to Dave and to meet myself, me, Daniel, what we're saying to you is this. Showing up peacefully is not extremism. Showing up lawfully is not recklessness. Showing up publicly is not hatred. In a democracy, the United States of America, peaceful public assembly is part of how citizens communicate seriously and seriousness. It is one way that we, the people, can speak without us asking permission from the power or the powerful first. And maybe that's exactly why it matters so much.
Well, let's flip the script here a little bit, Daniel, and ask a question. What happens when people don't show up? What happens when the worried remain private? When the decent stay quiet? When the tired retreat? When the principle postpone? First, the illusion deepens. The illusion that nobody cares. The illusion that resistance is fringe. The illusion that fear is already won. And the illusion that public has adjusted. And those illusions are useful to unhealthy power. Because once people believe someone else has already gone silent, they become more likely to silence themselves.
You know, I like the way you're using that reminder to us about illusions that are strung together. That illusions, when you string them together, that's what Dave and I call the manipulation loop itself. You know, it gives the manipulator way to isolate us from ourselves, from each other, from our neighbors, from our friends, from our family members. You know, you just exhaust people. You know, you convince them that they are alone. You know, you convince them that their voice is too small. You know, they're not powerful enough. You know, you convince them that the public presence is pointless. It's not going to change anything. You know, and then you point to their absence as proof that your agenda, your agenda has public consent. It's your agenda, but you're saying that you have public consent. That's how civic emptiness gets weaponized. Silence becomes raw material. Absence becomes a prop. Fatigue itself becomes an opening.
And that's powerful. It also explains why showing up matters even before you measure policy change. Because presence disrupts false narratives. A crowd disrupts the lie that nobody cares. A crowd disrupts the lie that only extremists are motivated. A crowd disrupts the lie that conscience is dead. A crowd disrupts the lie that public can be endlessly pushed without response. Sometimes the first victory is not legislative. Sometimes the first victory is moral visibility. It's saying there is still a line. There are still people who know the difference between strength and domination. There are still citizens who refuse to be psychologically trained into obedience.
You know, and that matters, not just politically, ladies and gentlemen, but spiritually too. Because every society teaches its people something. In its actions, it teaches them, it teaches you, it teaches me what gets rewarded. It shows, you know, what gets tolerated. It allows us to realize who and what is being mocked. It shows us what it gets feared, what gets normalized. So when people gather peacefully in defense of democratic principles, they are not just making noise, they are teaching. They are teaching children what courage looks like. They are teaching communities what solidarity feels like. They are teaching institutions that the public still possesses a pulse. They teach the powerful that the people are not furniture. A peaceful crowd can become a moral classroom.
And that right there is why this can never be reduced to, does one protest fix anything? Of course not. One protest doesn't fix everything. One vote doesn't fix everything. One truthful conversation doesn't fix everything. One act of courage doesn't fix everything. That's not the standard. The standard is, does it matter? Does it witness? Does it strengthen the spine of the people involved? Does it resist the slide into passivity? Does it keep democratic muscle from completely atrophying? If the answer is yes, then it matters.
We're trying to say it plain for everyone to be with us on this, ladies and gentlemen. The cost of not showing up is often delayed. We don't really get the whole cost immediately. That's why you and I may tend to underestimate the cost. We don't always feel the damage immediate. We feel it later when the culture has moved further than you thought possible, when the language has coarsened and shaped itself more than you have imagined, when the standards have eroded more than you anticipated or expected, and when the people who should have been visible were nowhere to be found. That's when regret talks. And regret always sounds stronger in hindsight than courage does in the moment. At Truthful Manipulation, we talk a lot about influence, pressure, framing, and the hidden ways people get moved without realizing it. But this show is not just about spotting manipulation out here and out there. It's also about strengthening what's in there, what's in here. Your judgment, your ethics, your spiritual posture, your ability to remain human in a world that keeps rewarding performance over principle. So whether you're reading the book, listening to the podcast, sharing these conversations with someone you care about, we thank you for being part of our community, and we still believe that truth matters. So follow the show, share the message, stay awake, and stay anchored, because clarity is not a luxury anymore. It's a form of protection. And now let's go back to the show.
I want to slow this down here, because underneath all the politics, all the headlines, all the personalities, there's a deeper human question. And that question is this: when it matters, where were you? The question reaches across generations. It reaches across movements. It reaches across failure and triumphs and collapses and recoveries. When it mattered, where were you? Were you watching? Were you waiting? Were you rationalizing? Were you too tired? Were you afraid? Were you hoping someone else would carry the moral weight? Or were you present?
That question can sound harsh, but I don't think it's meant to shame anyone. I think it's really meant to clarify where we are, ladies and gentlemen. It forces you and I to decide who we are and when our values too expensive. Everybody is for courage when courage is clean. Everybody is for principles when principles are popular. Everybody is for truth when truth costs them nothing, you know. But the real test comes when there is friction, when there is uncertainty, when there is public risk, when there is discomfort. That's where character stops being a slogan, ladies and gentlemen, and starts becoming more visible.
And that visibility matters. You know why? Because people are always learning from what they see. Your children learn from what they see. Your neighbors learn from what they see. Your friends learn from what they see. People who are wavering learn from what they see. When they see decent people show up peacefully and firmly, they learn that courage is possible. When they see good people stay home, they learn that fear has a wider reach than principle. That's just real.
Showing up is not only about sending a message outward, it's about forming something inward, in you, in me. Because every time you act in alignment with your values, guess what? You strengthen your own moral structure. And every time you betray your values, ladies and gentlemen, for something comfortable, you weaken it. That weakening may be invisible at first, but over time it adds up, doesn't it? You become more cautious, then you know more concerned about your image, more conscious about that than being brave, you know? You become more conscious of conflict avoidance than being principled, you know? You become more privately troubled than publicly honest. And that is its own kind of loss. A democracy erodes in public, but it often begins eroding in private compromises.
That line's huge. It begins in private compromises. I'll let that slide. I'll say nothing. I'll keep my head down. I'll protect my comfort. I'll wait for a better time. And piece by piece, people become strangers to their own convictions. That's why weekends like this matters, because they offer an interpretation of drift, an interpretation of resignation, an interpretation of learned helplessness, an interpretation of the slow training process by which citizens are reduced to spectators. And maybe that's the biggest thing a peaceful protest does. It reminds the public, you are not only here to watch.
Dave, let's talk directly in terms of asking our audience questions for a minute, if you don't mind. Okay.
Sure.
And maybe you're listening while you're driving. Maybe you're just walking. Maybe you're sitting at a kitchen table. Maybe you're already thinking about this weekend. Maybe you're already making excuses. So let me ask you a few direct questions, dear audience. What do you believe your civic responsibility actually is? What does freedom require from you besides opinion? At what point does concern become action? How much erosion of truth, dignity, and accountability are you willing to watch before you decide presence matters? Your presence matters. And maybe the hardest one, what are you teaching the people around you by what you do next?
Well, here's another set. If you say you believe nobody is above the law, does your life ever show it? If you say you believe democracy belongs to the people, are you willing to be one of the people who actually shows up? If you say you oppose manipulation, intimidation, domination, and propaganda, what visible stand do you take when those forces become louder? If your answer is always a private agreement and never public presence, then what exactly are your values doing for the world around you? That's not an insult. That's an invitation to honesty.
And maybe you're listening saying, "I- I'm just one person." Yeah, you are one person. And so is everybody else who ever mattered in a crowd. Crowds are made up of one person. Movements are made up of one's decisions. Cultures are changed by repeated individual action, and those actions become collective witness. So don't hide behind smallness. Smallness has never disqualified consciousness. You do not need to be famous to be faithful. You do not need to be influential to be courageous. You do not need to control the outcome to justify your action. You only need to know what side of the line you are standing on. History itself does not only move through heroes, it moves through ordinary people who refuse to disappear.
And that refusal to disappear, that's the whole point. Not to become performative, not to become self-righteous, not to become reckless, but to become visible in the right way, at the right time, for the right reason. That's moral adulthood.
Let's go a different direction here. Oh, and I don't mean this logistically, ladies and gentlemen, I mean morally. What do you bring with you to a moment like this? First of all, you should realize that you bring clarity. Now, why are you going? You should know why you're going. You should know what you are affirming. You should know what you are rejecting. Don't just go because the crowd is there. Go because your conscience is there. Secondly, bring discipline with you. Do not let someone else's provocation become your loss of purpose. Do not let spectacle replace substance. And do not let anger become the only language you speak. Strength and self-control, they belong together.
And third, bring humility. Because showing up publicly does not make a person morally superior, it makes them responsible. Responsible for their conduct, responsible for the message they embody, responsible for protecting the legitimacy of peaceful civic action. This is not theater, this is witness, and witness requires integrity.
Number 4, if you will, bring steadiness with you. You do not need to be, frantic to be serious. You do not need to be hateful to be firm. You do not need to be cruel to be clear. Some of the most powerful public moments in history have been powerful precisely because the people involved refused to become what they opposed. Now that matters, and it matters a lot because it is easy to condemn domination while accidentally copying its spirit. We must not do that. The goal is not to defeat arrogance by becoming arrogant. The goal is to confront it without surrendering your own soul.
And fifth, bring hope, not the cheap kind, not fantasy hope, not passive hope, not wishful thinking. Bring active hope, the kind that walks, the kind that stands, the kind that gathers, the kind that refuses to let despair have the final word. That kind of hope is strong. That kind of hope has muscle. That kind of hope can be seen.
And I'll add one more. Bring peace. Now, I don't mean passivity. I mean peace. A steady heart, a sound mind, a refusal to be baited into becoming a distorted version of yourself. Because peaceful public presence is not weakness. It is disciplined moral force.
Before we head into the final stretch, let me say this. If these conversations matter to you, help us build this community. Follow Truthful Manipulation, share the podcast, pass the book to someone who needs it. Bring these ideas into your home, your workplace, your church, your friendship, your decision making. Because manipulation thrives in darkness, confusion, and silence. But truth gets stronger when people are willing to carry it into the room. Truthful Manipulation, a roadmap to live by, for people who want to lead with integrity, think more clearly, and stand stronger in a world trying to shape them without their consent. Read it, share it, live it. Now back to the show. Now let's bring it home. Why this weekend? Why now? Why is it more important than ever? Because these are times in public life when inertia becomes dangerous. There are moments when delay helps the wrong forces, moments when private disapproval is no longer enough, moments when visible civic presence becomes part of protecting the moral structure of a country. This feels like one of those moments.
And nobody is saying one weekend changes everything. That would be too simple. One weekend can reveal something. One weekend can strengthen something. One weekend can awaken something. One weekend can remind people that the public still exists. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what is needed. A reminder that we, the people, are not merely an audience. A reminder that our consciousness can still be gathered together. A reminder that the truth itself still has bodies willing to stand beside it. And a reminder that fear is not the only thing that spreads. Courage spreads too.
That's beautiful, Daniel. Courage spreads too. And courage often spreads because somebody went first, or because somebody finally joined, or because a person who thought they were alone looked around and realized they're not. That's the hidden power of peaceful public action. It restores proportion. It reminds the manipulated that they're not the only ones seeing what they see. It reminds the intimidated that intimidation is not omnipotent. It reminds the exhausted that they still possess a voice. It reminds the cynical that society is not vanished from the earth. That matters.
Yes, and so maybe the real question is not, will this solve everything? Maybe the real question is, what kind of people are we becoming, America? What are we if we never show up at all? Because that answer, it has consequences. Those answers have consequences for our reality, consequences for our culture, consequences for the truth, consequences for the generations to come, the younger generations behind us, consequences for what gets normalized next. And let's be plain. and perfectly clear here. The price of silence is never zero. Silence does not keep a democracy a democratic safe haven. It only makes the erosion quieter.
That's exactly right, Daniel. So to everyone listening, this is not about perfection. This is not about having every answer, and it's not about becoming a political performer. This is about refusing to make peace with the unacceptable, refusing to let domination become normal, refusing to let fear become policy, refusing to let exhaustion become surrender, and refusing to let your beliefs remain tapped inside your chest when public witness is required. That's why this weekend matters, because there are moments when merely believing the right thing is not enough.
So, dear listeners, here's where Dave and I will leave this. If you believe in constitutional limits, show it. If you believe no one is above accountability, show it. If you believe public office is not personal ownership, show it. If you believe truth is not a costume to be changed depending on who benefits, show it. If you believe this country belongs to the people and not to the appetite of power, show it.
And show it peacefully, show it lawfully, show it with discipline, show it with dignity, show it with self-control, show it in a way that leaves no doubt that what you're defending is bigger than your anger, because what you're defending is principle, a principle older than the latest headline, a principle bigger than the latest personality, a principle more important than the temporary comfort of staying home. The principle is simple. We do not bow to kings.
Yep. Not crowns of ego. We don't bow down to crowns of intimidation, not crowns of propaganda, nor crowns of grievance, not even crowns of unchecked power. No kings, only citizens, only accountability, only the hard, imperfect, necessary work of self-government. That is our inheritance, America. That is our responsibility, we, the people. That's the burden that we share. That's the privilege that we, and every generation has to decide whether it still wants to carry it or not.
So ask yourself one more time, when it mattered, where was I? And then answer it, not with a thought, not with a post, not with a complaint, but with a presence. No crowns, no thrones, no kings, just people willing to stand up for the country they still believe is worth protecting.
And that's today's episode. Thank you for being with us. We thank you for thinking with us. And we thank you for refusing to go numb, to stay grounded, to be ethical, to stay awake. And remember, when truth gets manipulated, the answer is not surrender. The answer is clarity, courage, and character.
We'll see you next time on Truthful Manipulation.
Take care, everybody.
And that's this week's episode of Truthful Manipulation. Don't forget to get out this weekend and participate. If you'd like to comment on today's show, you can reach us at truthfulmanipulation@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe at truthfulmanipulation.com. Make sure you share this podcast with people that you like and people that you trust. Let's get out this weekend and make America great again. Thank you, everybody, for listening this week. We'll see you next week on Truthful Manipulation.